Welcome to another DCS tutorial, and this time there is no Harrier. Instead, we're looking at the A-10 and how to employ Mavericks. As per most of my tutorials, I'm not really aiming this at first time pilots, however there's no reason why they can't follow along. Instead, I'm going to be looking at more advanced employment of the weapon. So instead of just firing a single missile, we're going to see how we can rifle a full payload as far out as we can and as quickly as we can. As you can see, my A-10 is fresh out of a paint shop, sporting 617 Squadron downbus delivery, and we're armed with 6 Mavericks. We're en route to our IP at waypoint 1, and we have 6 T-90s just near to waypoint 2, about 15 miles to the south, who aren't going to have a very good day. We're using a D model here, but we could use any of the Maverick types as they all function pretty much identically, with the exception of the E2/L model, which is laser guided. I'll cover that model in a separate video where I'll look at self-lasing as well as buddy or JTAC lasing. Before we start, there are a few things I want to cover off. First of all, I'll assume that you have HOTAS set up already with the relevant mappings. You're definitely going to need it. I'll be using terms like coolie hat left long, TMS right, and I assume that you know what these mean and the difference between long and short in this context. I'll always mean short unless I specifically say long, so TMS left means TMS left short. I'll also assume that you know what the sensor of interest or SOI is, and also the sensor point of interest or SPI. If you don't, I might cover the basics off at some point in the future, but there are 100 other videos that do that already. One additional thing that isn't standard that I have set up is for changing waypoints. The A-10 HOTAS controls are great for marking targets using TMS right, which is really easy. However, its HOTAS controls for next waypoint are, to be honest, appalling, as it only works when the HUD is SOI. And when firing Mavericks quickly, it won't be. It seems to be a monumental design oversight in my opinion. To change waypoints using HOTAS, you would have to make the HUD SOI using the coolie hat, change the waypoint using DMS, and then make the Maverick SOI again using a long coolie hat press, which doesn't sound difficult, but when combined with the rest of the procedure, which is already a little convoluted, it becomes at best slow and prone to error, and at worst unmanageable in combat. Or you could use the non-HOTAS steer point buttons on the UFC, which ironically is easier than using the HOTAS in many situations, but then you're fumbling around trying to click when your hands very much need to be on the throttle. To overcome this, I just mapped the UFC controls to my HOTAS, which is a massive improvement not just for this tutorial, but it's actually better all the time. If you're a milsimmer and want 100% realism, then you might not want to do that. You might prefer to get shot down because it took you 40 seconds longer to fire 6 missiles, but that's your call. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get on board and make a start. So we're on board and we're approaching our IP at waypoint 1. So we're going to start by selecting waypoint 2, which is in the general area of our target. As I just mentioned, I have this mapped to my throttle, but you'd normally use the UFC or the HOTAS controls. Let's just set up a nice little orbit here whilst we continue and pop on the autopilot. We now want to bring up the lightning pod in air-to-ground mode, so that's OSB 7 on the right MFD. And coolie hat right long to make it SOI. If we didn't know where the target was, we'd now just search around for them. But we know that it's near waypoint 2, so what we need to do is slew the sensor to the SPI, which is currently at waypoint 2, and we'll do this by pressing China hat forward long. The default mode is CCD, but to find vehicles we're much better off in flare mode, so we can use boat switch forward for black hots, aft for white hot, and centre to go back to CCD mode. We still can't see anything, so we need to have a little look around, and for this we need the HOTAS slew controls to move the seeker. DMS forward and back to zoom in and out, and we can use China hat forward to toggle between narrow and wide fields of view. So DMS forward, and there we are. That looks like some Acacia 152mm howitzers. And there we have some supply trucks. And those are our T90s. Now China hat forward for narrow field of view, and we want to place the cursor at the bottom of the target. Once we're happy, then we're going to set a mark point by pressing TMS right. And now we need to do that for the other 5 targets. You can have up to 25 mark points, which are labelled A through to Y, whilst Z is a special mark point, and that is the last place you fired your weapon at, and that gets automatically created and updated every time you fire a weapon, including the gun. But do be careful when pressing TMS right to create the mark point, as if you make a mistake you cannot correct it, so you either have to start over or remember to bypass it during the attack, and you'll probably forget. So that's all 6 targets set. We now need to be able to align to and cycle those mark points. On the HUD here, we're currently showing waypoint 2 or mission waypoint 1. So over here to the right on the AAP panel, we need to switch this from mission to mark. Now, when we look at the HUD, we can see mark point A instead of waypoint 2. And instead of scrolling through the waypoints, we scroll through mark points A to F, which we've just created. Just going to loop round a little bit so we can get eyes on the target once again. Okay, that's a little bit better. If we press China hat forward long now, we will slew the lightning pod to the target. And now when we cycle the mark points, we can see that all of our targets are aligned to our mark point. So let's prepare our weapons by hitting Master Arm to on. Then we need to select our Mavericks, which is another HOTAS fail. We can use HOTAS by pressing Coolie Hat left until we're on the DSMS page, and then making the HUD soy by pressing Coolie Hat forward, and then pressing DMS left and right to select the weapons that we want. And then we need to set the MFD back to how we had it. But most of the time it's just easier to press OSB 19 and then whichever OSBs you need, in this case 3 and 13, to select our weapon. We're now going to bring up the Maverick page and make it soy with Coolie Hat left long, and then slew the actual Maverick seeker to the mark point using exactly the same method as before, which is China hat forward long. The Maverick Seeker has reached its gimbal limits, but don't worry about that. As soon as you turn on target, it will be slaved correctly. We're only going to fire 3 Mavericks here, and quite slowly, just to go through the procedure. And once we've done that, we'll go back and do it more quickly. The Maverick Seeker doesn't have great magnification and it's often not very clear, so you might want to play around with the brightness and especially the contrast to see targets more clearly. But if it's aligned to the lightning pod, it's not so much of a problem, as the target should be clear enough by the time you're ready to fire. If we press TMS forward, we can try and get a lock, but we're still too far out yet. We're still 15 miles out, and we're not going to get a lock much beyond 10 miles, and it can often be a lot less. When we do get a lock, the crosshairs on the Maverick Seeker will close up. However, sometimes we can get a partial track allowing us to launch before we have the full lock. We will, however, need to see the range marker, and so as soon as that appears, I'll keep pressing TMS up every half second or so until we're ready to launch. And there's our lock and rifle. Then we'll hit next waypoint, and then China hat forward long to slew the Seeker, and then China hat forward short to change the narrow field of view, TMS forward to lock, and rifle once again. And then we'll repeat that procedure a second time. Next waypoint, China hat forward long, China hat forward short, TMS forward, and rifle. So let's try that again with 6 targets, and I'm going to abbreviate what I'm saying. So when I say next, I mean next waypoint. Long is China hat forward long, short is China hat forward short, and TMS is TMS forward short. I'm not going to go through the entire procedure again, and I have already set my mark points and my weapons and aligned them to target. So I'm just waiting for the range marker. So I'm going to take a little pause there. As you can see, my speed is around 300 knots and 14,000 feet, which is all good. We want to be as fast as we can to give the Maverick as much energy and thus range as possible. And after the first launch, I'm going to continue at full throttle, but just to demonstrate that I can get all 6 missiles off the rails from a safe distance. I could close the throttle after the first launch if I wish to minimise the ingress. However, you need to be careful not to lose too much energy unless absolutely necessary, as if you lose too much speed, you'll not be able to evade any unexpected threats. As for the altitude, we could get up over 20,000 feet and maybe get another half-mile range, but you probably won't get any sort of lock, and at that altitude you can't really maneuver very aggressively. Conversely, if you dive down to 5,000 feet, your range will probably drop down under 9 miles, even if you accelerate up to 400 knots or so. And then there's the added danger of being engaged with IR SAMs. So just to reiterate, we should aim for maximum speed and probably around 12 to 16,000 feet. So let's unpause and continue in. There's a range marker, so TMS forward. No lock, so we'll try again. And again. And there we go. Rifle. Next. Long. Short. TMS. 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 Rifle. I actually fluffed the second launch a little, but for everything else we're looking at 4 to 5 seconds and around half a mile between launches, which is pretty good. Also, the first launch was at 8.7 miles, and you can often get a lock at 9.5 miles. So turning to safety outside of 7 miles is definitely possible. That means you can easily take on an SA-15, and you could even attack 4 tanks and an SA-15 in a single pass. Bear in mind an SA-15 will almost certainly intercept 1 Maverick, so you should probably fire 2 Mavericks at an SA-15 itself. Before we wrap up, the sharp-eyed amongst you might have noticed that in that second attack I didn't get a full lock for 5 out of the 6 launches. So let's take a quick look at what went on. I'm pressing TMS forward and the crosshairs don't lock here, they kind of wobble. This is a Maverick Seeker finding a target but is unable to get a proper lock, but launch inhibit is released, allowing you to fire, and you will hit a target. However, you cannot guarantee that you'll hit the correct target, and that would depend on how close each other vehicle is, and I think anything over 4 to 5 milliradians should be okay, and that equates to about 75 meters separation at 10 miles. As you can see, my last launch though does get a full lock. So that about wraps it up. I hope you learned something new, and if so, please do hit like and subscribe, and of course feel free to leave comments, and hopefully I'll have some more A-10 tutorials coming soon. And I have to say, it's great to be back flying what I consider to be the best attack plane in DCS.